Now that we have a pretty good idea where the plot of Ice Queendom is headed, these alternate character designs that we were shown before the series started airing now hold a lot more significance. We are about to journey into the world of Weiss's nightmare, a nightmare born from her insecurities, and each of these character designs a reflection of how Weiss views that individual. The more that she is familiar with that individual, the more their design is going to reflect how she feels about them. That is why some characters seem to have very little changes and others seem to have much more drastic changes, the most of which being Weiss herself, becoming the nightmare version of herself, the Ice Queen incarnate, based on the insecurities that she has of herself and how she wants herself to be, or at least thinks she does at the beginning of the series. And so that is what we are going to discuss today, the meaning behind each of the alternate designs of Team RWBY and Team Juniper that are going to be present in Weiss's nightmare. And before I get into things too much, I do want to say I'm not a psychologist, so if you have anything else you'd like to add, other things that you see that could be related to how Weiss views certain characters, including herself, please let me know down in the comments below. This is one where everyone is going to see different things in the different character designs, and I'm really curious to know how everyone is viewing each of these characters. But with that being said, let's start off with the Ice Queen herself, Weiss Schnee, and I want to give a quick shout out to Keith Montalbo for allowing me to use his artwork in this video and in the thumbnail. So, Weiss's insecurities are fairly plain to see, especially in episode 3 of Ice Queendom. We know that she wants to be a leader of her own team. She wants to be on the same team as Pyrrha, someone that she sees as strong and reliable. And she's also very prejudiced against the Faunus. But those insecurities in particular are more reflected in the designs of other characters. For the nightmare version of Weiss herself, I think the main insecurities that are shaping this version are those that she holds about the Schnee family itself. We are given a brief glimpse into Weiss's family life at the start of Ice Queendom. We see how her mother is drinking in the garden, pretty much ignoring the rest of her family. We see how Weiss is treated by her brother Whitley and her father Jacques. And also, we are introduced to Weiss's sister, Winter Schnee. And I think Winter is a very prominent influence on Weiss. In the original RWBY series, we see how much Weiss looks up to her sister. When we are first introduced to Winter in Volume 3, Weiss is adamant about trying to impress her, doing everything she can, working on her glyphs, making sure that her dorm room is immaculate, that her grades are stellar, etc. She wants to be like Winter. And I think that is reflected in the nightmare version of herself. Not only is it sort of militaristic, similar to how Winter also chose the path of the Atlas military, but this version of Weiss also seems to personify the more negative characteristics of Winter. When we see Winter Schnee and the way that Weiss sees her as well, likely Weiss sees Winter as someone who is strong, independent, and capable, but also someone who is distant, cold, and at times uncaring. And in the nightmare version of Weiss, it seems like those aspects are heightened, very cold, very uncaring, but also someone who looks strong, that they can hold their own and that they do not need anyone else. One thing that Weiss has wanted to do for the entire time that we've known her in the RWBY series is strike out on her own, forge her own path away from her father. But in particular, in volumes 1 to 3, she does not want to give up the title of heiress of the Schnee Dust Company, something that Winter abandoned when she joined the Atlas military. So I'm curious to know how that's going to play into the Nightmare Weiss design, because Weiss definitely wants to rely on Jacques' money still and still be the heiress to the Schnee Dust Company. That is her family's legacy, something that she does hold strongly to, but she also wants to be someone that is strong and independent. And I think the Nightmare is going to create this version of Weiss, showing her something that she will never be, and attempt to torment her with that, feeding off of her aura the entire time. This version of Weiss being the strong, capable leader that Weiss always wanted to be. But through this nightmare, and through Weiss likely being trapped within her own mind, not able to do anything about this, similar to how Jean wasn't really able to attack the nightmare within his own dream either, he was more trapped within it, and others had to come rescue him. This is going to be the same with Weiss, most likely. She is going to be just an observer to everything that is happening. And through this experience, she's going to come to terms with her insecurities, realize that maybe she doesn't want to go down that path specifically. And when she comes out the other side, that is when, she's going to start being able to truly be a teammate to the rest of her team. At least that's how I think things are going to unfold in terms of how Weiss is going to deal with seeing this version of herself. Now, there are a couple notable things with the images that we have seen thus far of this nightmare version of Weiss. First and foremost, she no longer has the scar over her left eye. It's not something that we've seen her be outwardly insecure about throughout the RWBY series, but likely it's something that she thinks about every time she looks in the mirror, sees this scar. It's a reminder of how she could have been better, that she could have done something different, that she isn't as strong as she could be. A sign that she is not perfect, something that she does want to be, but something she'll realize that she doesn't need to be. Another thing that we've seen in the initial promotional image that we saw, with the Ice Queen sitting upon her throne, and behind her what seemed like an army of autonomous robots. She is alone. She is isolated, and she is the leader of her own military force. She can stand on her own and not need anyone else. This is very telling of how Weiss views herself. She needs to be able to stand on her own. She needs to be able to carve her own path, not rely on anyone else but herself. And eventually she will learn, just as she has in the original RWBY series, that she is stronger with her friends. That by relying on others, she can truly be the best version of herself. And through this nightmare, that will likely come about. But let me know your thoughts on the Ice Queen and how her character originated from Weiss's own psyche in the comments down below. But now moving on to the rest of the characters that we were shown in this preview, starting with a very significant one, Ruby Rose. Weiss does not view RWBY as a team leader, more as a goofball, not necessarily as a huntress in training, and that is very much reflected in RWBY's alternate design. Her crescent rose is now a snowboard, and it looks like RWBY is prepared to just go snowboarding. An added note, with Weiss being from Atlas and with this nightmare being born from her dreams, this is probably going to take place in an alternate version of Atlas that the nightmare will create from Weiss's memories. So that's why everyone is wearing winter-style clothing. So, our initial thoughts that this was going to be taking place in Atlas weren't entirely wrong to begin with. But with RWBY's design, more childish, more playful, not really a fighter, in contrast to Yang's design, whereas Yang hasn't really changed all that much. Seems to be in a bit more winter attire, but still seems to be very much a fighter, very much capable. Because Weiss, as of this point in the series, hasn't really formed that many, at least negative, opinions of Yang. Yang is willing to stand up to Weiss. Yang is someone that is willing to stand her ground and is a capable fighter. Something that is reflected in her character design, in this dream version of herself, in contrast to RWBY. I honestly really love where Ice Queendom is going with all of these different designs, and the design space that they are exploring with the nightmare, and seeing how each person, how each individual views the people around them. And I hope we get to see even brief glimpses of how, RWBY and Yang and other characters view everyone else as well, that we see some more alternate designs. Of course, the series itself is going to focus on Weiss's view of everyone, but it would be nice to see a glimpse into other people's psyche as well. Now, when we get to the final member of Team RWBY, this is where one of the most telling changes comes from. How Weiss views Blake, and especially her prejudice against the Faunus. Weiss views all of the Faunus as criminals, as vagabonds, as kind of, animals, almost. And that is very much reflected in the version of Blake created in this nightmare. Not only does Blake have the cat ears, but she also has a cat tail and cat paws. She has many more animalistic traits than normal. But also, the bow on her head is only covering one of her ears. And to me, that signifies that Weiss isn't exactly sure about Blake. Weiss knows that Blake is a faunus, that she was a member of the White Fang, and hasn't gotten to the point of being able to move past that yet, still seeing her as a criminal. But I think she also wants to see her as a teammate. At the end of episode 3, there was that conversation, the same as was at the end of RWBY Volume 1, where Weiss told Blake that she doesn't care about her past, that Blake's told her she wasn't a part of the White Fang anymore. She moved on from that, and Weiss accepted that. Now, she hasn't fully accepted that in her own mind, but she's outwardly accepted that, wanting to move forward and be an actual team. But in this nightmare, this is something she's going to have to come to terms with. And I think that half a bow covering one of Blake's ears is a sign of Weiss wanting to accept Blake. Either because the ribbon resembles what Weiss thought of Blake before finding out that she was a faunus, or it could even be that the ribbon is still covering part of Blake's faunus identity, meaning that Weiss hasn't fully accepted her as a faunus just yet. It could go either way with what that ribbon symbolizes, but again, let me know down in the comments below. When we get to Team Juniper, in the case of Jean, Nora, and Ren, well, their designs don't really change that much. They really just put on winter attire in the same color scheme as their normal clothes, and Jean really only gets mittens, a scarf, and a toque, so, you know, not really changing that much there, because Weiss hasn't really formed that many opinions of Jean, Ren, or Nora because she just doesn't know them that well. In Ice Queendom, and really in Volume 1 entirely, Weiss just hasn't interacted with them. But there is one member of Team Juniper that Weiss knows about, and knows a lot about. Someone that she has put on a pedestal. Pyrrha Nikos. And that is why Pyrrha's design has changed so much, why she seems to have this almost regal look about her. Her clothing itself being a different color scheme of the clothing that Weiss wore in Volume 5. In Weiss's Nightmare, I think we were actually going to see Pyrrha working alongside the Nightmare version of Weiss, that they are going to be joined in whatever task it is that the Nightmare version of Weiss is trying to achieve. Likely something involving military, given all of the, military droids and everything behind her in the promotional image, so it could very well be that RWBY, Blake, and Yang may have to fight against this alternate version of Weiss and against Pyrrha. And this is something I'm also curious about as well. If the characters that are born from Weiss's Nightmare reflect what Weiss thinks about them, does that mean Pyrrha's fighting capabilities will also reflect what Weiss views them as? Because Pyrrha, we already know, extremely skilled, extremely talented at combat, but Weiss is elevating her, like, seemingly even beyond that. Is Pyrrha quite literally going to be unbeatable in Weiss's Nightmare? I doubt it, otherwise the nightmare may never get broken, but we'll have to see, and who knows? Given that Weiss has interacted with Pyrrha a little bit thus far in Ice Queendom, in particular, the fact that Weiss sees Pyrrha accept Jean as a leader unquestioningly, it might actually be the dream version of Jean that ends up, convincing the dream version of Pyrrha to not go with the nightmare version of Weiss. Though that doesn't necessarily make sense, with each of the versions of these characters being something that were created by Weiss's dream itself. It wouldn't seem likely that Pyrrha would be swayed away from Weiss's side, but we'll have to see. We do know that the rest of Team Juniper is going to play some role in Weiss's Nightmare, given that they have alternate designs, but we'll have to wait and see how the plot of this nightmare actually plays out. And once the nightmare begins, then we'll be able to form more ideas on it, and, I'll be able to make more theory videos on it. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments below about each of the alternate designs of Team RWBY and Team Juniper, how the Ice Queen came about from Weiss's own mentality, of how she views herself, the insecurities that she holds about those around her, as well as herself, and in particular, how she compares herself to her family, how she wants to strike out as an independent, leave her family behind, and how she idolizes her sister. I've said it a number of times already, and I'm sure I'm going to say it numerous times again, but I really love where the plot of Ice Queendom is headed and how we are going to explore more about Weiss and hopefully these other characters. And hopefully all of you are as well. So, if you like this video, want to see more like it, more coverage of Ice Queendom as a whole, and more theory videos both on Ice Queendom and RWBY Volume 9 that we have been given some more information about, then make sure to subscribe and join the Guild of the Eternal Flame. Tweet me at PhoenixKnight7, and I'll see you guys in the next video.